Welcome to Eat Well, Travel Better, the Business of Food Travel podcast with Eric Wolf and Ashi Vale, where we help you become a better industry professional by gaining inspiration from some of the world's most successful people in the food and beverage tourism industry. With each episode, we meet these leaders and examine their secrets of success. We reveal the obstacles and challenges they have faced, along with their solutions and triumphs, and give you ideas and inspirations for many of the same business issues that you may be facing as well. And now for today's episode. Welcome. I'm Eric Wolf, and I'll be your host today for episode 43 of Eat Well, Travel Better, the Business of Food Travel podcast. And joining me today is co-host Ashi Vale. Today we'll be speaking with Royce Chwin. Royce is a recognized figure in the tourism industry in Canada. Some of his exciting career highlights include work on the 2010 Olympics project and national branding for the Canadian Tourism Commission, as well as marketing strategy work and executive leadership at Travel Alberta. And just last year, Royce moved again to accept the position of President and CEO of Tourism Vancouver. Royce doesn't think like others, and we like that about him. That also means he finds unconventional and still respectable solutions to whatever issues he faces. He is also featured in our association's 2021 State of the Food Travel Industry report, which you can download from our website. Welcome, Royce.
Thanks for having me, Eric.
Welcome, Royce. I'm going to start off and just ask the big question. You
Okay.
moved in the middle of the pandemics to start a new opportunity? That's a bold move. What inspired that?
A few things. Firstly, Vancouver is my hometown. So, born and raised here for 40 years, and I left here to go take the job at Travel Alberta. And so I spent the last 10 years in Alberta, and I knew it was time. I think any good leader knows when it's time to make a change. And this opportunity to come back to my hometown to try to help this organization be part of a rebuild and restart for tourism, it just made all kinds of sense to try to do that. And so, why not change provinces, cities, and jobs in the middle of a pandemic? There couldn't be a greater challenge, and I'm delighted to have done it.
That's wonderful. What are some of the ideas that you guys are working on to really change tourism in Vancouver?
Well, it really started in a conversation during the interview process. And the board was looking for change. And I asked them the degree of change. Are you looking for change to get back to what was? Or are you considering a wholehearted change for the organization in terms of its core purpose? And the board said that's where we're looking to go. So I'm really considering that Tourism Vancouver is a 117-year-old startup. And so 117 years, but now it's time to say, what does the future need and what role will Tourism Vancouver play in that? And it just can't be about tourism marketing anymore. The community, our partners, the residents expect more for an organization like us and what we contribute. And that's the journey that we're starting to go down right now.
So, Royce, you were in Alberta for what? Was it about 10 years or so? Is that right?
Yeah, 10 years.
Okay. All right. Well, it's a beautiful province, and so is British Columbia. What were some of the key takeaways from your role there at Travel Alberta? Because you were doing branding work, and then you went into the executive leadership role there. So you must have some lessons learned from that time there.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Where do I start? I guess maybe the first thing, and I think about one of the capstone projects that we worked on was the Remember to Breathe brand for the Alberta tourism story and the learning around that. And there's all kinds of philosophical debates about country branding or regional branding or placemaking, all those kinds of things. And I think the learning is that Alberta already has a brand. Whatever people are thinking about the province based on how they're hitting the headlines for all kinds of reasons beyond tourism. Our real strategy was to try to figure out how do you tell that tourism story differently in a way that will connect differently with people given all the noise. And that was one of the biggest learnings. The story is there, just figure out a better way of trying to share it, not tell it, but share it. And I really think we accomplished that because over the 9, I guess close to 10 years, pretty much, that the Remember to Breathe story came out. It had incredible appeal. The remembrance factor of what we were trying to do really resonated with a lot of people. And a quick story about that. One of our tourism partners, a hotelier from the province, was traveling in Southern Ontario and going through the border into the US. And at the border stop, the U.S. Border Crossing Guard, I was asking her where she's from. And she said, well, I'm from Alberta. Oh, what do you do? Tourism. And he said, Oh, do you know anything about this breathe thing? This remember to breathe something or other. This was a US border guard in Southern Ontario that had seen and the message had resonated. So they started to talk about Alberta. That was such a big win for us if it could resonate at that kind of level. That's what we were hoping for.
And while you were managing that project, what were some of the key takeaways with your team? Any kind of learnings, maybe some things that they learned as they were participating in this process with you?
If you're the smartest guy in the room, usually the room is empty. So let's get the team involved and let's learn to ask better questions about how to tell the story. And we would say the team is those being inside of Travel Alberta and the agency that we were working with, Copperthorne Blakely. And I have to give them kudos. Such smart people, such collaborative people, did not have the agency ego, no surprise and delight. So the collaboration for storytelling is a critical component of what worked. People felt they had a voice and they felt they had value and purpose in the conversation.
That is fantastic. Yes, absolutely. You have to involve your team and make sure that they feel valued. And I really like what you said, ask better questions, because sometimes people will only ask half a question and then everyone's frustrated because they can't continue working on the project, and it's because they don't understand the scope because the question wasn't fully understood from the outset, I think.
Yeah, I agree, Eric. And I think we're influenced by the speed at which we have to do our business. So we're trying to do things in half measures and everything is fast. So our questions are half baked or the real simple questions and they don't get into the heart. So now we're spending double the time because we're not asking better questions up front.
Yeah, double the time and maybe four times the amount of work too. With, the internet was supposed to save time, and I think it's just made more work for everybody.
I agree.
Royce, how do you gauge the success of some of these stories that you come up with and that you share? What are the metrics that you use, and how do you think about gauging success as you think about this new opportunity with Vancouver?
I think some of the learnings around gauging success is getting into the technical aspect of it is, what are the metrics that we can see on platforms? And that's table stakes, views, engagements, those kinds of things. The other part of it is the soft side and the way in which the brand and the work resonates, not only with the industry, but with travelers themselves and their responses. And that was actually very critical as well. Another way of looking at it also, because Travel Alberta is a crown corporation, we had to ensure that the shareholder, the government of Alberta, also supported the effort, and they did. And so we look at success in sort of those areas. And I guess lastly, I would say resident success. And did residents of Alberta really glom onto or share the brand? Because that's the ultimate success. And it was incredible how much that made a difference in terms of their ability to storytell the place that they live. Another funny story, my mom got an email from one of her friends, and there was a link to the hero video that we put out when we launched Remember to Breathe. And she sent it to my mom and she said, "This is incredible. I've never seen anything like this. I think your son is over in Alberta. Do you know anything about this at all?" Mom said, "Yeah, I know a guy." So, the way the residents picked up and moved it around and it was connecting and rolling back, it said to us, you know what, we really found some magic here on storytelling and the upfront work around collaboration, time, patience, resilience to tell the story. I have another quick story. We were on a shoot as part of this piece of work, and we were on a mountain filming a ski scene. And I had a call with one of the mountains who was trying to tear a strip off me because I wasn't filming at their mountain. And the point of it wasn't about promoting your specific mountain. It was promoting the experience of incredible powder and skiing and in untracked runs. And that really helped to shift. So when I go back to your original question about tracking metrics, it's about getting industry on side, the soft side of it. Industry recognized that we weren't going to take an industry-led approach. It was about being strategy-led, and the strategy to lead was about storytelling for the destination.
You've talked about collaboration with locals a couple of times, both in the State of the Industry Report interview and also today. And I agree with you 100%. You really have to make sure locals are on board and really get their input. But what do you do with people like the mountain guy who just wants you to focus on his mountain, right? Or the local residents who just want you to focus on their neighborhood or their business and don't get that we're all in this together? How do you manage that situation?
The best way that we found to manage that, because of what our business is about, and our business is about people. So we're in the people business, what we do with tourism. And that's the great qualifying conversation, if you will, in my experience, whether or not it's the mountain operator, whether or not it's the resident in the community, it's a peer DMO that's out there. Start off with the traveler. That then reduces this need for me, where am I, where am I? Are you relevant to the traveler that we're trying to get? That changed the conversation. And then that conversation now becomes a strategy led conversation versus an industry or community led conversation. And it now invites other people at the table to consider a bigger picture.
That's a really good insight, Royce. It's always about the end user, and in your case, it's the traveler. And how do we really want to improve their experience? In post-COVID times, how do you see that story changing in Vancouver?
In one way, it doesn't change. In another way, it changes, meaning that we absolutely have to focus on this new kind of traveler that is existing in the pandemic and will exist even out of the pandemic. Calling it the COVID traveler is not a good marketing term. So, what we came up with was the available traveler. And that meaning, what influences this traveler? How will we be able to rebuild confidence with this person? What things can a destination do within their control to influence confidence from this particular traveler? One of the things that we needed to do was to identify the biggest influences on this traveler. And that has absolutely changed since COVID has arrived on the scene, meaning that other destinations perhaps are not as much of a challenge for us. Government announcements and media is the biggest challenge for us and our number one competitor to trying to unlock and figure out how we can attract this available traveler to our destination.
Can you speak a little bit more about the challenges you face from a media perspective and government? What do you mean by that?
Well, we know right now that government has a responsibility to protect the healthcare system, and by that, protecting residents, communities, all of those kinds of things. We know that media has a responsibility to report on the media, what's happening with case counts, government health orders that may have changed, directives, lockdowns, curfews, quarantines, all those things. In our study around the available traveler, what we found out is there's such an incredible media influence that's growing in terms of people's considerations around travel that we really have to account for in terms of how we go back out and start talking to these people again. It's not about us competing with Alberta or another province or the US. It's about competing with media and government in those messages. That's a difference that we've never had to encounter before as an industry.
Once COVID is over and things start to normalize a little bit, people start traveling again, what is Vancouver going to look like in, say, 5 years from now when things are back to normal? What's your vision for the city?
Boy, it's such a great question. What's my vision for the city? It's a few different things, and it's sort of what we're focusing on right now, and that is the role of Tourism Vancouver becoming Destination Vancouver, for the city to reaffirm or reestablish its place as one of those best global cities to visit, to continue to highlight and support not just the marketing of the city, but all of the great development things that are in the pipeline that are going on in this city right now that people might not know about. The Granville Entertainment District, as an example, storied area for decades. And there's a major development being considered right now to keep some of the historical elements like the Commodore, but remake that streetscape for people. And so when we think about where we're at right now, how we reopen the city and welcome people again, and knowing that there's a future vision for continued development in making the city livable and clean and safe. Those are the critical things to reestablish Vancouver in the global market. It's not rocket science by any means, but it is resilience and determination amongst city partners and communities to work together in order to accomplish this broader progressive view of the city and its place.
And Royce, I think you're pretty big on the concept of destination management instead of destination marketing, which is a bit of a sea change. And I think it's a needed one. Can you talk a little bit about what that is? Because I think a lot of the tourism offices listening would benefit from hearing your words of wisdom on that.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's been one of those soapboxes that I've stood on over the last little while. And that really came out of my learnings being in Alberta and looking at more the global scape of how governments or other stakeholders were supporting tourism, particularly around funding and understanding the purpose of a tourism marketing organization. And if we look forward and progressively in the role of these organizations and how they've evolved, I think that we've done ourselves a disservice over the last several years by calling ourselves a tourism marketing organization. That's to define us by a tactic. And if we're going to have greater relevance and provide value to the community in which we serve and the partners, it seems natural to us to evolve into a space around destination stewardship or destination management that has to be underpinned by that triple ROI: people, planet, and profit. What concerns us is this idea of more, growth for growth's sake. And we know, quite frankly, we've seen the lessons for centuries, that's not sustainable. So, what is a balanced approach around people, planet, and profit? We think we can get there with a destination management approach versus simply being a tourism marketer. And so that's the premise that we're working on. We've got to look at working with all pieces of the community involved in the story of how we rebuild our visitor economy. What I've also learned over this time is that when I've had a conversation with stakeholders about tourism marketing, there are those that feel left out because I don't do tourism marketing. That might be true, and that's the tactic. Where I've seen the change in conversation to be more proactive and collaborative is to talk about destination promotion. People say, oh, how can I play a role in that? Do I have a role in that? It's a heck of a lot more collaborative, it's more inviting, and it's way more positive, and people feel like they can contribute.
Royce, I love that PPP sort of philosophy and making sure that it runs through every project and task that you work on. Could you tell us a little bit about maybe sharing a story or a specific example on how you were able to hit on those three values?
That whole idea of testing the triple bottom line and moving to destination management was a conversation I started while I was in Alberta as CEO for Travel Alberta. And we were getting a lot of pressure in the organization for the right reasons in terms of trying to help an industry that was really hurt by the energy downturn. And it was a lot about growth. And there was a very aggressive growth target set by the government that came into power that effectively was doubling the value of the visitor economy. So they wanted to drive it from 10 billion to 20 billion by 2030. So we said, wow, okay. If you want to do that, if that in fact is the provincial stretch goal, let's look at what has to happen. And it can't be just about marketing money to get more visitors. The reality is there's simply not enough experiences, there's not enough product, and there are not enough areas that are developed. And if that's the case, then I think we've got to ask some better questions. And the better questions are, if it's an idea to move to more of a responsible triple bottom line, our suggestion is people, planet, and profit. What are the people resources that we're going to have to leverage and engage in? What impact are we going to have on the planet in Alberta to create more experiences? And are we willing to put in policy that allows for responsible, sustainable development? And that's how this whole conversation began to change, particularly around policy. There's tourism policy and there's policy that impacts tourism. And if we can connect that to a triple bottom line, then we have a very different conversation going forward. And so that's how it all started. And I've carried that over to my conversation here in Vancouver now.
That's really interesting. Royce, you were leading the helm during a huge economic downturn when the price of oil tanked. What was that like? What kind of lessons did you learn just in life or about communities when you were watching the price of the oil falling and all of a sudden everyone's budgets were drying up so quickly?
Wow. That is probably one of the best life lessons that a leader could undertake. And who knew back then when we went through that downturn that would prepare me mentally for COVID? Because in the beginning of 2015, when oil and energy prices began to slide, that really just took the bottom out from Alberta. Hotel occupancies declined precipitously. We started to see a retraction in businesses. So economically, the job losses were staggering in the province. And so that's a precursor to what's happening now. And so, not that it changed, but it reinforced the need for communication and collaboration. Again, this isn't rocket science stuff. There's no magic to this, but it really amplifies the importance of having those conversations with your partners and being very clear about what you can do and what you can't do and where you can prioritize your efforts. And so we changed the frequency, tactically, we changed the frequency of our roundtables with our leaders around the province. We changed the kinds of questions that we were asking in terms of understanding and how to support their business. But it really gave me the fortitude and the resilience to be calm, to not be impatient. It's not helpful. To create all kinds of chaos because something has happened beyond your control is not going to help our industry, much like the pandemic they're in right now. And so what people have noted about my style is I'm not ping ponging all over the place. Very calm and steady leadership. And I think that's what requires right now to get us out of this chaos and move it forward.
You seem to be a very resilient person. Is that something that you've learned over the years? And how do you get that strength to be resilient?
Yeah, resilience is something I learned, although it's funny, I don't think I ever thought about it specifically as learning to be resilient. It was simply the situations that I was in my various careers that I've had leading up to this point, the environments that I was in, like Alberta, when the energy downturn knocked our feet out from underneath us, whether or not at a previous job I was let go. I was packaged out and they made changes. Never saw it coming. It was a complete surprise to me. And so these touch points along my career built resilience to realize that with the right mindset, I will figure out how to land on my feet. I will figure out what I need to focus on. And I can also then leverage those people close around me who are sort of my personal board of directors that can help me to see opportunity where I might not have seen it in the past.
Can you touch a little bit more about that personal board of directors, Royce? I think that's a really wonderful idea to have, both from a support community that helps you find new solutions to get out of any challenge you're in, but also as a way to keep you accountable. So can you talk a little bit about how you got that personal board of directors and what inspired you to form that?
Certainly looking at other leaders, and I've been really fortunate to have some different mentors in my life, some that are still friends to this day. And one of those things that came up was around a personal board of directors. And that all came out of a conversation about vulnerability, meaning that are we able to ask for help from other people and really not worry about our ego? And so the suggestion was, look, given your circumstances, given things that you're living in, different people can add into your narrative and you can bounce things off of these people. They'll have different perspectives, which really increases your critical thinking and your awareness of what you're dealing with. So vulnerability is the key. Don't be afraid to go out and ask those questions and ask that help and present issues that you're dealing with that are really tough and challenging because we don't always have the answers, and that's okay. The other part of that story around vulnerability was that I went out and I got an executive coach. Best thing that I could have ever done. It was recommended by a board member. I'm naturally hyper curious, and I'm a natural learner. But what I recognize is I can't just simply do it on my own. And so having this executive coach come in who also reinforced the idea of a personal board of directors really cemented those facts for me. And it's been a massive help to help me navigate my time in Alberta and now my time here in Vancouver as we go forward.
Yeah, Royce, I agree with you on the personal board of directors. I call mine my inner circle. And so
Mhm.
I've been working with the same concept for years, but I agree. The fact that we have recognized there are people who are smarter than us, right? And we need help. And so reaching out to people who we know are smarter than us that can help us move along, whether it's personally or professionally, that I think is a great goal for people to have.
I agree. I can affirm from my own perspective, I'm not sure that I would be where I'm at right now if I hadn't had the vulnerability to reach out and ask for help and ask the hard questions and get the tough feedback that helps shape our leadership and our direction going forward. One of the things that they say is that top ranked leaders ask three times more questions than directives that they give because they're constantly learning and they constantly want to improve, and ego doesn't get in the way of the betterment of all of those working with them and around them. And I fully subscribe to that.
I think that's fantastic, Royce. I guess one follow-up question to that would be, How do you go about getting people to be on your personal board of directors? It sounds like it's a slew of people who are in your personal life, in your professional life. Is it just a matter of reaching out when you have a problem that you need help with? Do you keep in touch with them on an ongoing basis?
It's a little bit of all of that. And I say that internally, personal board of directors, it may be 3, 4, 5 people that I can reach out to with different kinds of business problems that I'm working on, whether it's business specific or even life, actually. And they all provide a different perspective. I've learned that over time based on the interactions with these people. And as I've invested in the relationship with them, that it's come to a place where I can count on them to be supportive in terms of what I'm looking for or the help that I need. And then it goes vice versa as well. And so it's really about personal comfort and critically connection. And again, I keep this theme asking better questions, that this individual really gets that and can really respond in kind. And that's how I've made the connections with this sort of inner group, as Eric was saying, or this personal board of directors. But it's so personal. You shouldn't put out an application form. You just naturally and organically develop those trusting relationships.
Yeah, and I think that it may be harder for younger people sometimes because they don't have the size of networks that people who are a little more established in their careers have. And I guess I would say to younger people, probably, I think when someone is special, when they just have such a brilliance about their persona. You're speaking to them and it's nonstop excellent ideas, right? Or it's nonstop support of what you're working on. And I think that when you identify that, a light bulb goes off and says, wow, this person is different than the other people I'm interacting with. They are probably going to be more helpful to me, or they're certainly more interested in what I'm doing and how to help me get ahead. I think when you identify those specific people where the light bulb goes off, that's your call to grab onto them and see how you can involve them more in your own personal board of directors.
Eric, I couldn't have said it better myself. And the one thing that I would add to that in my learning, and this is a message for those introverts out there, I am naturally an introvert. That's my most comfortable space. Don't let that be a barrier for you to reach out to this network and create this personal network. Even the students out there, I don't want to be dramatic and say it's the worst thing that you can do, but maybe think about what you're missing in terms of the opportunity of creating these networks where you can learn through people who've been through the battles, who have got the scars, who can offer non-judgmental advice and suggestions. That is gold that you will never find in any book that you'll ever read.
Royce, we asked you before the show, what are your secrets of success? And you said there were no secrets. Can you expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, I just, it's an interesting question. I don't think there are any secrets personally, and I don't know. I don't keep secrets in terms of what we're doing in talking to my peers. For example, they ask me, what are you doing? What's your budget? These kinds of things. I just say there's no tourism secrets. What do you need to know? How can I be of service? And maybe that's one of those tenets of success, is asking that question. How can I be of service? Because I get so much more back by giving out and learning from others and appreciating what others are going through. That helps fortify me in terms of what I'm doing here and what I can bring back to this team. So be super curious. Develop your resilience. Don't be afraid of stepping into the ring and getting a little bit of a bloody nose every once in a while. Put ego aside. Have pride, but put ego aside and admit when you don't know. That is so powerful because it brings out the vulnerability and the empathy. And certainly that self-awareness right now as leadership, and as you're trying to lead people who are looking for guidance, want to know that you're a human and that they can relate to you in some way. And I've had more meaningful conversations, created better, stronger relationships as a result of that approach than anything I've ever else that I've done in my career. And it's been a journey to learn to get to that place.
You're so right, Royce. It takes so much strength to be vulnerable. And we hope that we find people who are empathetic to what we need. And it helps to also be empathetic to others to really understand where they are in their lives. And reaching out to help others is one great way to create that community. As you segue into some personal memories and thoughts, do you have a favorite food memory or a place that you'd like to go back to and travel when we can all travel again?
Oh my goodness. Not enough time, not enough money to travel, and I can't wait to get back. So there's two things that pop into my head if I'm going to leave the country that I love, Canada, and I'm going to go out and travel. One is to head back to Italy. I was there about, I guess, coming up 4 years ago now, and such an incredible experience, particularly around food. Oh my goodness, it still resonates, not from just going out to restaurants, but going and doing a cooking class that was supposed to be 2 hours and it ended up being 5.5 hours. It was incredible. But the other thing that I'd love to do is to go do a tour of the British Isles and regionally check out all the different food and beverages along the way in a British Isles tour. And I've wanted to do that for as long as I can remember. It's something I haven't done and completely different. So I'd like to go over there.
Wow, the British Isles, that's a complex one. You and I can share stories on that. Royce, last question before we wrap things up. What do you say when people ask you what is Canadian cuisine? Because I think this is a challenge that a lot of new world countries have. I think the US is a little different because we have so many overt immigrant influences. But you look at Australia or New Zealand, and I always include Canada in this too. And I think Quebec is a little different, obviously, because of the French influence. And we can talk about local and seasonal and stuff, but when people say, what is Canadian cuisine? It's more than poutine. So how do you answer that?
Wow. It's not the first time I've had that question. It can be a simple and a complex answer all at once. I guess the simplified answer, and not to stir the pot, but why does Canadian cuisine have to be a something? It can be many things because the complex, I think, part of the answer perhaps is the way this country was created through immigration, through different melting pots of cultures, through its own interesting interprovincial personalities and regionalization. The gratitude that we have is the food sources that we get out of this country that can be applied to all of these recipes and ideas that have come from these great creators, makers of food that have come into the country and have mentored people, their own kids, if you will, the learning institutions along the way for culinary to create this great melting pot of cuisine. And I think that's what's interesting about Canada. You can't put your finger on just one thing. Sure, we can talk about poutine and all of its variations, but back to that British Isle conversation, you can go down blocks of various cities or various places in this country, and cuisine just changes rapidly, particularly based on what might be local and available. And that's what I love about the diversity of Canadian cuisine. You can't just pigeonhole it into one thing. And life is about exploration. Why shouldn't that be about food as well?
Indeed, I should have asked a better question. It didn't have to be just one thing.
Well,
And how many people expect that there is a noticeable Ukrainian influence in Alberta, right?
yes, I've got a little Ukrainian in my background, and people would not expect that. So, absolutely, there is a great contingent of Ukrainians in Alberta who do an incredible job with food.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember you shared that with me when we were in Halifax in 2010 together. And then when I was doing the food tourism strategy for Alberta, that came up as well. And I thought it was just so interesting because it's not one of those culinary cultures that you hear a lot about. And then all of a sudden there was this little community of Ukrainians who were actually influencing the food that people were enjoying in Alberta. It was really interesting.
Well, there's the power of brand right there. Alberta's known for Alberta beef and barley and those kinds of things because that's the stuff that hits the airwaves most often. And when you start to peel the proverbial onion back, then you find all these little regional cuisines, in particular Ukrainian, and they just do such an incredible job with the food there. It's so authentic, and they can pull right from the land around them.
Well, Royce, I'd like to thank you for your time. Ashi and I can just tell by the cadence of the conversation, it's been a true pleasure. You are always such an interesting guy to chat with, and I know your time is so precious. So we would really like to extend a huge thanks to you for taking the time out of your busy schedule, helping people in our industry, and especially in the crazy times that we're in, to really inspire them and teach them something so that they can grow in their careers as well. So thank you again, Royce.
Yeah,
Well,
thank you, Royce. Thank you for digging personally and for giving us those words of wisdom. We really appreciate it.
well, thank you for being curious, and thank you for asking, and thanks for asking better questions. It was an absolute delight to spend time with you and reach out to your audience. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening today. The Eat Well, Travel Better podcast is brought to you by the World Food Travel Association. the world's leading authority on food and beverage tourism. Our mission is to preserve and promote culinary cultures through hospitality and travel. By doing so, we empower local communities and entrepreneurs with the knowledge and tools needed to reach new food lovers and gain a competitive edge. Founded in 2003, now each year we shepherd a community of 200,000 professionals in more than 100 countries. Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And you can learn more about us, subscribe to our newsletter, and join our family at worldfoodtravel.org. Until next time, eat well and travel better.